On December 18, 1878, in the small Georgian town of Gori, within the vast Russian Empire, a child was born. A boy with a pock-marked face from smallpox, his left arm hanging awkwardly at his side from an old injury. His father beats him regularly. His family lives in crushing poverty. Nobody looking at this child could have imagined that he would one day control the largest country on Earth. That he would shake hands with Churchill and Roosevelt as an equal. That his decisions would affect the lives of hundreds of millions of people. He was a small child, but the world would come to know him as Joseph Stalin. In a cramped two-room house in the Georgian town of Gori, a woman named Ekaterina Galadze gives birth to her third child. She's already lost 2 babies. This one survives. His father, Vissarion, is a cobbler, but he's not a particularly good one. As his business fails, he turns to alcohol, and when Vissarion drinks, he gets violent. The beatings are savage, unpredictable. Both mother and son learn to walk on eggshells. Stalin later claimed his harsh childhood forged his steel will. That's probably not entirely wrong. When you grow up expecting betrayal, expecting violence, expecting the worst from people, well, you start to see enemies everywhere, and you learn to strike first. When Stalin was 5, his father abandoned the family entirely. Ekaterina takes her son to live with a local priest. She's determined, absolutely determined, that her boy will escape poverty through education. She works as a cleaner, takes in washing, and does whatever it takes to keep him in school. The irony? She dreams of him becoming a priest. In 1894, 15-year-old Stalin won a scholarship to the Tiflis Theological Seminary. His mother is ecstatic. Finally, respectability. Finally, a future. But seminaries in the Russian Empire aren't just about God. They're hotbeds of revolutionary thinking. Students pass around banned books like they're trading cards. And one book changes everything for young Stalin. Karl Marx's writings on communism. Here's a guy who grew up with nothing, watching his father drink away what little they had, seeing his mother work herself to the bone just to survive. And suddenly, he's reading about a world where the poor rise up and take what's theirs, where workers control their own destiny. It's intoxicating. Stalin didn't graduate. By 1899, he's either kicked out for revolutionary activities or leaves due to illness. The stories vary, but one thing's certain. The boy who entered seminary dreaming of priesthood leaves as a committed revolutionary. His mother never forgives him for abandoning the church. Years later, when Stalin ruled the Soviet Union, she still tells people she wishes he'd become a priest instead. Stalin, meanwhile, throws himself into the ground movement with frightening intensity. He organizes strikes, spreads propaganda, and robs banks to fund the cause. This isn't some romantic revolutionary playing at being dangerous. Stalin understands that revolution needs violence, and he's comfortable with violence. Between 1902 and 1913, he was arrested 7 times. He escapes from Siberian exile multiple times. He adopts Elias after Elias, Koba, David, Sasso. Finally, he settles on Stalin, Man of Steel. The name fits. At this point, it's clear that Stalin is setting himself apart from other revolutionaries. He's not interested in grand speeches or theoretical debates. While other Bolsheviks argue about doctrine, Stalin focuses on the practical work of revolution. He builds networks, he eliminates rivals, he gets things done. There's one man who appreciates this approach more than anyone else. Vladimir Lenin, the exiled leader of the Bolshevik faction. Lenin is building a revolutionary movement, and he needs people who can do more than just talk. He needs operatives who can organize, intimidate, and deliver results. This man notices Stalin's work in the Caucasus. In 1912, he brings this tough Georgian into the Bolshevik Central Committee. It's the beginning of a partnership that will reshape the world. But there's tension from the start. Lenin finds Stalin useful, but doesn't particularly like him. He calls Stalin's manner Asiatic, a racial slur disguised as political criticism. Stalin never forgets the insult. By 1917, World War I was tearing Russia apart. Millions of soldiers are dead. The economy is collapsing. People are starving in the streets. The The once mighty Russian Empire is crumbling from within. It doesn't take long for the Tsar to fall. Nicholas II abdicates. A provisional government takes power, but it's weak and indecisive. They keep Russia in the disastrous war that's destroying the country. And suddenly, impossibly, the Bolsheviks, this tiny radical faction, have a chance to seize power. During the October Revolution, Stalin played an important role, but not the starring role he would later claim. That belongs to Leon Trotsky, the brilliant orator who actually organized the coup. Trotsky is everything Stalin isn't: charismatic, intellectual, inspiring. Stalin hates him for it. The Bolsheviks win. Now comes the hard part: actually governing. Stalin gets appointed to handle nationalities, all the different ethnic groups within the massive Russian Empire. It's considered a minor position. Big mistake. Stalin uses the job to build his own power base. While other Bolshevik leaders focus on ideology and grand strategy, Stalin focuses on bureaucracy. He appoints his allies to key positions. He controls information flow. He makes himself indispensable. 1922. Lenin had a stroke. Then another. He's dying, and everyone knows it. But before that, he writes a political testament warning the party about Stalin. Lenin calls Stalin too rude, too power-hungry, too dangerous to lead. He recommends removing Stalin from his position as general secretary. The testament is suppressed. Stalin sees to that. When Lenin died in January 1924, Stalin positioned himself as Lenin's loyal successor. He delivers the funeral oration. He wraps himself in Lenin's legacy, and slowly, methodically, he destroys his rivals. First, he allies with Kamenev and Zinoviev against Trotsky. Then, he turns on Kamenev and Zinoviev. By 1929, Trotsky was in exile. By the mid-1930s, most of Stalin's old rivals were dead. He is winning through patience, cunning, and absolute ruthlessness. With absolute power secured, Stalin turns his attention to something far more ambitious than political survival. He wants to remake the Soviet Union entirely, transform it from a backward agricultural country into a modern industrial power at any cost. To do it, he came up with the first 5-year plan, which is impossibly ambitious. Stalin demands a 250% increase in industrial production. Factories spring up overnight, workers driven like slaves. Those who can't keep up are branded as traitors. But industry is only half the story. Stalin also wants to collectivize agriculture, force millions of individual farmers onto state-controlled collective farms. The goal? Extract more grain to feed the cities and export for hard currency. The reality? Catastrophe. Farmers resist by slaughtering their livestock rather than handing them over. In 1930 alone, a quarter of the country's cattle were killed. Production plummets. But Stalin doesn't back down. He escalates. Anyone who opposes collectivization is labeled a kulak, a wealthy peasant enemy of the people. The definition of kulak expands until it includes basically anyone who owns anything. Millions are deported to labor camps or simply shot. The result is famine, a man-made famine that kills millions. In Ukraine alone, somewhere between 3 and 7 million people starved to death in 1932 to 33. Stalin seals the borders to prevent people from fleeing. He confiscates grain while people die in the streets. The Holodomor, they call it. The killing by hunger. Stalin knows what's happening. He doesn't care. When told about the mass starvation, he increased grain quotas. By the mid-1930s, Stalin was eliminated outside opposition. But he's not satisfied. Now he turns on his own party. In 1934, Sergei Kirov, a popular party leader, is assassinated. Whether Stalin ordered the killing is still debated, but he certainly uses it as a pretext for what comes next. The Great Terror. Show trials begin. Old Bolsheviks, men who made the revolution, confess to impossible crimes. They admit to being foreign spies, to plotting against Stalin, to sabotaging the state they helped create. How do they extract these confessions? Torture, threats against family members, psychological breakdown. The terror spreads beyond the party elite. Factory managers, army officers, teachers, farmers. Millions are arrested on the flimsiest pretexts. The NKVD fills quotas for executions like their production targets. Of the 139 Central Committee members elected in 1934, 98 were shot by 1938. Stalin is literally killing the Communist Party to save it from imaginary enemies. Why? Some say paranoia, some say political calculation, but maybe it's simpler. Power. Absolute power requires absolute fear, and Stalin understands fear better than anyone. As war clouds gather over Europe, Stalin makes a decision that will define the next phase of world history. The Communist Soviet Union signs a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany. Stalin and Hitler, supposed mortal enemies, agreed to carve up Eastern Europe between them. Why does Stalin make this deal? Simple calculation. He thinks capitalist countries will exhaust themselves fighting while the USSR grows stronger. Let the Germans fight the British and French. The Soviet Union will sweep in later to pick up the pieces. It's clever, it's cynical, and it's a massive miscalculation. Dawn breaks on June 22, 1941. At 4 a.m., 3 million German soldiers cross the Soviet border. Stalin has ignored countless warnings. His spies tell him the Germans are coming. His generals beg him to prepare defenses. He executes many of them for warmongering. Stalin can't believe Hitler would be stupid enough to fight a two-front war. Admitting the threat would be admitted his pact was a mistake, and his ego won't let him believe he's being outplayed. The early weeks are a disaster. Entire Soviet armies are encircled and destroyed. Millions of soldiers surrender. The Germans race toward Moscow, Leningrad, Stalingrad. But Stalin adapts. He learns to delegate the competent generals like Zhukov. He appeals to Russian patriotism, not just communist ideology. He relocates industry east of the Urals, beyond German reach. Most importantly, he understands something Hitler doesn't. The Soviet Union can absorb losses that would break other countries. Stalin is willing to sacrifice millions of lives to stop the German advance. It works. The Red Army holds at Stalingrad. The tide turns at Kursk. By 1944, Soviet forces are pushing toward Berlin. Germany's capital doesn't hold out much longer and falls. Hitler is dead. The Great Patriotic War is won. Stalin emerges from the war as one of the most powerful men on Earth. The Soviet Union stretches from the Pacific to the heart of Europe. Stalin sits as an equal with Roosevelt and Churchill, deciding the fate of nations. But victory doesn't bring peace. Almost immediately, Stalin turns against his wartime allies. The Cold War begins. At home, Stalin's paranoia reaches new heights. He sees enemies everywhere, in the military, in the party, among intellectuals. The Leningrad affair, the doctor's plot, purge after purge. By the early 1950s, Stalin trusts no one. He lives in isolation, surrounded by terrified subordinates who know they could be destroyed with a word. February 28, 1953. Stalin is now 74 years old. His health is failing. Atherosclerosis from decades of heavy smoking, high blood pressure, previous strokes. But he still rules with an iron fist. That night, he entertains his inner circle at his dacha outside Moscow. Beria, Khrushchev, Malenkov, Molotov, the men who run the Soviet Union under his watchful eye. They drink heavily, watch movies, engage in the ritual humiliation that passes for relaxation in Stalin's court. The party breaks up around 5 a.m. on March 1st. Stalin seems in good spirits, perhaps a bit drunk, but otherwise normal. He dismisses his guests and retires to his private quarters. He's never seen alive again. Hours pass. Stalin usually sleeps late, so no one thinks anything of the silence from his rooms. But by evening, the guards are nervous. Stalin always emerges by this time. Always. Finally, a maid is sent to check on him with the excuse of delivering mail. She finds him on the floor of his study, unconscious, lying in a pool of his own urine. The guards panic. They can't reach Stalin without permission, but who can give permission when Stalin is unconscious? They call Moscow. Beria, Khrushchev, and the others rush to the dacha. They don't call doctors. Not yet. They see Stalin lying there, clearly having suffered a stroke, and they wait. Some say they were paralyzed by fear, others suggest something darker, that they saw an opportunity. Nearly a full day after Stalin collapsed, doctors are finally summoned. They're terrified. Many of their colleagues have been arrested in recent purges. They examine the unconscious dictator with shaking hands. The diagnosis is a massive stroke. Blood pressure 190 to 110. Right side paralysis. The doctors apply leeches behind his ears, administer cold compresses, try everything they can think of. But it's too late. For 3 days, Stalin lies dying while his lieutenants jockey for position. Beria seems almost gleeful. Khrushchev watches and waits. Malenkov tries to project authority. On March 5th at 9:50 p.m., Joseph Stalin dies. The man who controlled the fate of 200 million people dies as he lived his final years. Alone, surrounded by people who feared and hated him, unable to trust anyone enough to save his own life. The news is announced on March 6th. Across the Soviet Union, people weep in the streets. For many, Stalin was the only leader they'd ever known. He was the man who defeated Hitler, who made the USSR a superpower. But in the Kremlin, the scramble for power begins immediately. Within months, Khrushchev emerges as the new leader. In 1956, he delivers his secret speech exposing Stalin's crimes, and the spell is finally broken. That was the truth of the Georgian boy who dreamed of becoming a priest, but ended up becoming the most feared man on Earth.